Hey everybody, this video is called So Kind, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of 2 Samuel, looking at the 9th chapter, where we're going to look at David's kindness to Mephibosheth. And it's a fun name to say, but I think I got it down. If not, I'm sorry. But so tonight we're going to look at chapter 9 and verse 1 starting out. It says, "Now David said, is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" So we see that the chapter, it begins with the house of Saul. And David continued to display love and loyalty towards Jonathan by ministering to the physical needs of his crippled son, Mephibosheth. And in verse 2 through 4, it says, "And there was a servant of the house of Saul, whose name was Ziba. And when they had called him to David, the king said to him, Are you Ziba? And he said, At your service. Then the king said, Is there not still someone in the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? And Ziba said to the king, There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." Verse 4, "So the king said to him, Where is he? And Ziba said to the king, Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo Debar." And so verses 2 through 4 here, Ziba was a former servant of Saul who is mentioned here for the first time. And Machir was a man that was wealthy. He was a rich man. And we'll see more about him later on in chapter 17, verse 27 through 29. And you might be like, what is this Lo Debar city? And Lo Debar was a city located in Gilead, east of the Jordan, approximately 10 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. And we see that David wanted to show someone else the same kindness that God had shown him. And Mephibosheth was first mentioned back in chapter 4, verse 4, which is where it tells us that he is Jonathan's son. And it tells us how he became handicapped following an accident when he heard that his father and his grandfather were killed in battle. And back in chapter 4, verse 4, we see the nurse gathered Mephibosheth out of the fear of the new leader of the new dynasty. And Mephibosheth was a son of the firstborn of the king, and he technically had the right to the throne, therefore justifying why David may see him as a threat. But Ishbosheth was his uncle, and he waged bloody war against David for the throne of Israel, as we looked at prior. And there was a legit reason to fear Mephibosheth might do the same or even worse. And in chapter 17, verse 27 through 29 later, we'll see that Machir showed David intense loyalty. In verse 5 and 6 it says, "Then David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, from Lo Debar. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth? And he answered, Here is your servant. So Mephibosheth must have been terrified when David's messengers came to his door and demanded that he come out and see the king. And many kings would have their potential rival at this time period killed. But we'll see what happens coming up here. In verse 7 and 8 it says, So David said to him, Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. Then he bowed himself and said, What is your servant, that you should look upon such a dead dog as I? So the estate belonging to Saul was probably quite substantial. And David desired to honor Mephibosheth by bringing him into the royal palace and providing for his daily needs. And a dead dog was considered despicable and useless. And Mephibosheth saw himself in such a way that he knew he had not merited David's kindness and that there was no way for him to repay it. And David's offer was an extraordinary expression of grace and beauty to his covenant with Jonathan that we saw back in 1 Samuel chapter 20, that David would, respect the family. And David made good on his promise, as we see here. And David gave Mephibosheth the honor of a close relationship with the king. And Mephibosheth didn't feel worthy of such generosity, as he considered himself the value as if he was a dead dog or a worthless or insignificant person, is what that language would mean back in this time. In verse 9 through 12 it says, "And the king called to Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given your master's son all that you belong to Saul and all to his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always." And now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. And as for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons." And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So, as I said, the more I say the word, his name, Mephibosheth, it gets harder. It's almost like a tongue twister. But we see that here there are 15 sons and 20 servants numbered, and it shows the power and the influence of Ziba. And it also shows that the land given by David was substantial. And Micah was the son of Mephibosheth, and you'll find out more about his descendants later in the book of 1 Chronicles chapter 8 verse 35 through 38 and 1 Chronicles 9 verse 41 through 44. And as you're going to notice as we go through 2 Samuel, a lot of it is very relevant with the book of 1 Chronicles. And David, he gave Mephibosheth servants to work the land and the food from the land, and it was for Mephibosheth's family. And because he now ate at David's table. In verse 13 it says, "And Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet." And we see that this chapter is very short for chapter 9. And no longer hiding in fear of the king, this descendant of Saul now lived openly among the people of God. And we see that he is now given a great privilege before the king. And we see that he may have been lame in both his feet, but his life was far better off at this point. And if you know anything about this time period with handicaps, you were considered pretty low among society. And so to wrap up here, we see David's kindness. He gave a kind question and heart toward the house of Saul, like he promised his best friend Jonathan back in 1 Samuel chapter 20. And David went against the principle of revenge against Saul and his household. And we're introduced to the former servant of Saul, Ziba, and we see that he told David about the son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth. And we saw Mephibosheth made a humble appearance before David, and David removed his fear of Mephibosheth. And I want to go over to Luke chapter 22, verse 30. And we see in the chapter today that David took him in and let him into his royal area where he could dine with the king. And in Luke chapter 22, verse 30, it says here, "That you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And we see here in the New Testament, in the Gospel of Luke, of a similar promise that are given the followers of Jesus, as he told his disciples that they would eat and drink at his table in heaven at the Last Supper. And we saw that David's instructions to Ziba, and that David fulfilled his promise to Mephibosheth. And we see that David's grace to Mephibosheth gives us a wonderful picture of God's grace to us. And our King, he seeks us before we even seek him, as we are on the run, we are hiding, and we're poor and we're lame before we come, or before the King comes to us. You know, Jesus seeks after us. And we are received as sons with access to our King in fellowship. And David's grace can also show us a pattern in what it means to serve others and minister unto others, as we should bless those who are less fortunate than us. We should be blessing those, perhaps our enemies, when they don't deserve it, and we should show them the same kindness that God has shown us. And while we were enemies of God, before we even thought of God, God sent his son Jesus Christ to die for us. While we were ungodly, Christ died for us out of love. And today we observe Thanksgiving, and there's, this is the one day of the year when you see the most gratitude being displayed, or a sense of gratitude. Give it a few more hours and people are going to be knocking grandma down at Best Buy over a television that's going to break in the next year or two. But as we move into the holiday season, and I know some don't celebrate Thanksgiving or any of the holidays, and that's your own, self-conscious. I respect that, and that's why I believe that we should do Bible studies whenever, regardless if it's a holiday or not. And, this chapter, I think it fits well with the season we are in for Thanksgiving, that we look out for others and we show kindness to those who are not like us. And, may it help us in being a pattern to serve others and to minister to others. And may we show the kindness of God that God has shown us. And I hope that, we go past today and that we observe the practice of being servants to others that are less fortunate. And that's going to wrap up today's video. I just want to wish you and your family a happy Thanksgiving. And if you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, have a happy Thursday. But we'll see you next on Saturday, as we're going to step out of 2 Samuel for a topical video to be announced on Saturday. So I hope you have a great Thanksgiving afternoon. I hope you're enjoying time with your friends and family, loved ones, maybe acquaintances, whatever. Maybe you're serving your community, thank you. But I just want to wish you a great day. We'll keep this short right here, and we'll see you Saturday. God bless.